Well, as the federal government shutdown moves into week 4, it becomes the second longest in history. Senate Democrats have repeatedly voted down the continuing resolution that would fund the government into November. As of right now, there remains no apparent off-ramp for Democrats, who have dug in on an additional $1.5 trillion in Obamacare funding. Now, this demand for more spending comes as the federal government, the debt hit $38 trillion this week. Joining me now to discuss this and more is Eliabeth Mitchell, White House correspondent for the Daily Signal. Eliabeth, welcome back to This Week on Capitol Hill. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Any word that we might be coming closer to reopening the federal government?
Well, Kevin Hassett said earlier this week that he expected the government to be reopened by the end of the week, but unfortunately it is not looking like that's going to happen as we've reached Thursday. Senate Democrats voted once again yesterday for the 13th time against reopening the government. However, as November 1st approaches, which is when SNAP funding will run out, which is funding for food for low-income people, moms and kids, so those people could risk starving, that's supposed to put some pressure on Democrats. But Republicans are remaining steadfast in their commitment not to negotiate on ACA subsidies or anything else until Democrats vote to reopen the government, and Democrats are not budging. So the standstill continues, and I think we're all looking to see what is going to break the impasse.
So, Eliabeth, how widespread is the impact anticipated to be when it comes to food programs like SNAP?
The impact is pretty large. Previously, the president said that he's going to use tariff money to pay for some of these low-income benefits that Americans rely on, like WIC. But eventually, money will run out for every branch of government because funding is only appropriated for a certain amount of time, and that funding will eventually run out, which could cause issues in a very wide range of areas. For instance, the EPA will be able to make sure that the water and the air is safe, which could cause some toxic situations which the EPA wouldn't be able to deal with. The Small Business Administration is not able to give loans to small businesses, which could cause small businesses who rely on those loans to have to shut down during the shutdown. Of course, some people are reliant on the government for food, for housing, for a lot of things that would be very bad for them. And then on just a larger scale, a lot of these federal government workers are living paycheck to paycheck, and they've gone weeks now, many Fridays without getting a paycheck. And so some of them are going to start having trouble making rent payments, buying food for their families, paying off their mortgages, et cetera.
So, Eliabeth, during this time, OMB Chief Russ Vought has talked about some realignment. What are we seeing in terms of realignment of the federal government? Is this time in which more authority is granted to the executive branch being utilized to realign government?
Russ Vought has taken this opportunity to cut waste, fraud, and abuse from the federal government, a mission the Trump administration has had since the beginning. He's been cutting particularly what the president has called Democrat programs in blue states, such as DEI type of programs, Green New Deal, climate change type of programs that aren't very effective. Other programs that are deemed ineffective, those have happened in New York, California. I think we can expect to continue seeing that, which is another thing that's putting pressure on Democrats, which is the longer the government is shut down, the more power Russ Vought has to slash programs which they hold dear.
Last week, President Trump announced the creation of a new fertility benefit option, under which employers will have a legal pathway to offer fertility benefits directly to employees as they do for dental, vision, and coverage and life insurance. This goes back really to the campaign where in vitro fertilization was discussed. Tell us about the program that the president has put forth.
The president has promised for a long time that he was going to make IVF more accessible. He even said in his campaign that he would make it free and make it so that each employer was covering IVF for employees. And a lot of pro-lifers were very concerned by that because pro-lifers see that at the moment when an egg is fertilized, an embryo is created, which is a baby, which is an unborn baby. And so when in IVF, a lot of times what happens is these embryos are frozen for many years. Sometimes they're even discarded. And so this is a problem that a lot of pro-lifers have with IVF. And I think that it's pretty clear reading what the president did last week, that he did listen to the concerns of pro-lifers, because IVF coverage is not mandated for employers to cover by this move. And it's also prioritizing root cause treatments for infertility. Some say that IVF just puts a Band-Aid on the causes of infertility, whereas root cause treatments figure out what exactly is causing a family to be infertile and addressing those through more natural means. And so that's another thing that is going to be recommended in this insurance benefit plan for fertility. So I think that's something that a lot of pro-lifers were very happy to see.
Yeah, so it appears to be somewhat of a mixed bag. As you mentioned, the underlying reproductive issues that are being addressed through more natural causes or remedies. That's a positive. That's the first time we've seen something like that. But any regulation over what is really the wild, wild west when it comes to in vitro fertilization, because there's been no regulation in terms of how many embryos can be created and what happens to the excess embryos.
You're right that IVF currently is a area which has not been regulated as much as it has been even in other countries. And unfortunately for pro-lifers, that was not addressed by this move. But I think that the fact that the administration clearly listened to the concerns of pro-life groups and the recommendations they made, I think that it's not out of the question that we'll see some regulation in the future now that these concerns have been made known to the White House's Domestic Policy Council. But I think that that is a really good thing to keep an eye on, is will it be regulated more so that embryos aren't being destroyed, and also so that in situations in which people who later, we've seen situations in which couples who later turn out to be not safe to have a child will be able to adopt an embryo from a surrogate, and that's another issue that really needs to be regulated.
Elizabeth, we just have a little over a minute left. I want to switch gears to international issues, because that's been a major focus for the Trump White House, even during this shutdown. The president next week scheduled for a trip to Asia. He's going to visit Malaysia, Japan, and South Korea. What does the president hope to accomplish abroad?
Well, the trade situation with China right now has had a negative effect on a lot of American farmers because they're not buying U.S. soybeans, which has really harmed farmers. Farmers are, of course, a strong base for President Trump. A lot of them voted for him and helped him win this election. And so I know he really wants to deliver for farmers. And so he's going to go talk to President Xi about that and about other issues. And he said he's optimistic about how it will go. And I look forward to keeping up with it for sure.
All right, one final question for you. A little over 30 seconds left. The president really pushing for this peace to hold in Gaza and between Hamas and Israel. What are you hearing in the White House?
J.D. Vance said yesterday that he feels like the media is rooting for the ceasefire to fail, but this is just going to take some work. There are going to be times when we go back and forth on how successful it's going to be, but it looks like so far it's holding strong. Peace in the Middle East is a huge priority for the president, and this is a very historic deal, so we'll keep watching it.
All right, Eliabeth Mitchell, thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you. Have a great weekend.
For full shows, live and on demand, it's Salem News Channel.